They stayed quiet for months, some of them for years. These weren't politicians. These weren't cable news commentators. These were men who had spent their entire lives inside the most powerful military institution on earth. Men who had commanded troops in combat. Men who had sat in rooms where decisions about war and peace were made. Men who understood what it means to follow a chain of command and what it means when that chain starts to break. And now, one by one, they are speaking. Not to reporters, not to cameras, not to opposition research teams. They are speaking because they believe what they are seeing is dangerous. And when the generals start warning the public, you stop everything and listen. Because these are not men who speak lightly. These are not men who exaggerate. These are men who have spent decades being precise, being measured, being disciplined with every word. And right now, those men are saying something that should stop everyone in their tracks. So what exactly pushed them over the edge? What did they see? What do they know that we don't? And why is the timing of this warning more significant than anything they are actually saying out loud? Because the silence they broke wasn't accidental. It was a decision, a calculated, deliberate, deeply considered decision made by people who understood exactly what breaking it would cost them. And the fact that they made it anyway tells you everything you need to know about how serious this moment actually is. Let's start at the beginning. Because to understand why this warning matters, you have to understand who these men are. We're not talking about retired officials who spent their careers behind desks. We're not talking about political appointees who wore a uniform for optics. We're talking about combat commanders, flag officers, people who rose through one of the most merit-based institutions in American life by being better than everyone around them, by making the right call under pressure, by understanding the difference between a manageable risk and an existential one. These are the people now saying publicly what they have apparently been saying privately for a very long time, that something is wrong, that the direction they are watching unfold is not a political disagreement. It is something more fundamental, something that touches the core of what the military is, what it exists to protect, and what happens when the institution that is supposed to be above politics gets pulled into the middle of it. The warning didn't come from one person. That's the first thing you need to understand. This wasn't a single disgruntled former official with a book to sell. This was a pattern, a coordinated, deliberate pattern of voices emerging from the same world, speaking the same language, pointing in the same direction. Former Joint Chiefs, former combatant commanders, former service secretaries, and they are all, in their own words, saying the same thing. What is happening right now is not normal. It represents a departure from the principles that have governed civilian-military relations in this country for generations. And if it continues, the consequences will not be reversible. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Because the response from Trump's political world has been immediate and predictable. These are disgruntled generals. These are people who were passed over for promotions. These are the same military establishment figures who got us into endless wars that Trump promised to end. And some of that argument, if you are being honest, has surface-level traction. There are generals who have complicated records. There are former military officials whose judgment on foreign policy has been badly wrong in the past. The American military is not an institution without failures, without scandals, without its own political dynamics and internal hierarchies. All of that is true. But here is what that argument doesn't explain. It doesn't explain why men who have nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking are speaking anyway. It doesn't explain why people who spent their entire careers understanding the value of institutional loyalty are now publicly breaking with it. It doesn't explain the specific nature of what they are warning about. Because this isn't a policy disagreement. This isn't about defense budgets or troop deployments or the right approach to China or Russia. This is about something more elemental. This is about the role of the military in American democracy. And that distinction is the most important thing to understand about why this moment is different from every other civil-military tension in recent American history. Let's talk about what they are actually saying, because the coverage of this has been, as usual, more focused on the drama than the substance. And the substance is where the real story lives. The generals who have spoken, and the number is growing, are raising concerns in 3 specific areas. The first is the use of military personnel for domestic law enforcement purposes. This is not a new concern. The Posse Comitatus Act has governed the separation between military force and civilian policing for over a century. It exists for a reason. When you erase the line between the army and the police, you are not just changing a legal technicality, you are changing the fundamental relationship between the state and the citizen. Every military officer who has studied history, and these men have studied history deeply, knows what happens in countries where that line disappears. It does not end well. It does not end with more freedom. It does not end with more security. It ends with something that looks nothing like the country the military swore an oath to defend. The second area is the direct injection of political loyalty tests into military promotions and command assignments. This one is harder for civilians to fully appreciate because the promotion system in the military is opaque to most people. But to the men who have spent their lives inside it, it is foundational. The idea that you advance because of your performance, your competence, your judgment under pressure, not because of who you voted for, not because of your political affiliation, not because of whether you praised the commander-in-chief on social media. The moment that system gets corrupted by political considerations, the military stops being a military. It becomes something else. Something that history has a word for, and it is not a word Americans have ever associated with their own armed forces. The generals who are speaking know this. They have seen it happen in other countries. They have spent their careers helping those countries try to fix it. And they are watching the early stages of it happening here. The third area is the one that nobody wants to talk about directly, but everyone in that community is thinking about. What happens if a sitting president refuses to accept the results of an election and asks the military to support that refusal? This is not a hypothetical for these men. It nearly wasn't a hypothetical in January of 2021. There are documented accounts of senior military officials in that period making very specific decisions about very specific requests. Decisions that, had they gone the other way, would have produced an outcome that no one in that room wanted to contemplate. The men who were in those rooms are now speaking. Not about the specific conversations, not yet, but about the environment that produced them, about the pressure that was applied, about what they saw and heard and were asked to consider. And their warning is simple, and it is devastating. If you put someone back in that position and the guardrails that held last time are no longer in place, the outcome next time may not be the same. Here's what nobody in the political media is focusing on, and it is the most important part of this entire story. The generals who are speaking are not speaking to Democrats. They are not speaking to the opposition. They are speaking to the institution itself. They are speaking to the active duty officers who are right now inside the military, who are watching what is happening, who are trying to figure out what their obligations are, what their oath means, where the line is between following lawful orders and refusing unlawful ones. That audience, the men and women in uniform right now, who will be the ones actually asked to act if things go further, that is who this warning is directed at, and that is why it is more consequential than any political speech or any congressional hearing or any legal proceeding. Because it is a conversation happening inside the institution about the soul of the institution, and those conversations, once they start, do not stop. Let's talk about what is actually surfacing, because this is not just a matter of opinion. There are memos, communications, records of meetings, requests and orders that were given and questioned and in some cases refused. These documents are beginning to emerge through legal proceedings and congressional requests, and what they show is not a story of a rogue general here or a disgruntled official there. They show a pattern. A systematic pattern of pressure applied to the military institution to perform functions it was never designed to perform, to serve loyalties it was never designed to serve. The generals who are speaking have seen these documents. Some of them created them. Their willingness to speak publicly about what they represent is the most significant development in civil-military relations in this country in a generation. Now, here is the part that the people defending Trump most want you to ignore. The most credible voices raising these concerns are not liberals. They are not people who have any ideological reason to oppose a Republican president. Several of the most prominent figures who have spoken are lifelong Republicans. Some served in Republican administrations. Some voted for Trump in 2016. These are not partisan actors. These are institutional actors. People whose entire identity and career was built inside one of the most conservative institutions in American life. And they are saying what they are witnessing crosses a line that has nothing to do with party, everything to do with something deeper. The survival of the kind of military that has kept this country safe and free for 2.5 centuries. That is not a political talking point. That is the most serious warning that can come from that community. And it is coming now with a volume and coordination that has no precedent in modern American history. What happens next is the question everyone should be asking. Warnings have a shelf life. Either they produce a response or they get absorbed into the noise of a cycle where everything is controversial and nothing is disqualifying. The generals speaking know this. They understand their words will be dismissed, attacked, politicized. They issued them anyway, which means they calculated that the risk of speaking is less than the risk of continued silence. That is not a calculation men with their experience make lightly. And when men like that decide the time has come, it is worth asking what they know that they are not yet saying. Because the public warning is never the whole story. The specific incident, the specific request, the moment where they understood silence was no longer an option, that part is still coming. And when it does, it will land on top of everything they have already put on record. The question will not be whether the warning was serious. The question will be whether anyone listened in time. These men took an oath, not to a president, not to a party, not to a political movement. They took an oath to a constitution, to a set of principles written by people who had just fought a revolution against exactly the kind of executive overreach they were now trying to prevent. The generals who are speaking now are the inheritors of that tradition, and they are telling you as clearly as men of their background and training know how to tell you anything that the system is under pressure it was not designed to withstand, that the safeguards are being tested, that the people who are supposed to enforce the limits are being replaced by people who will not. This is the warning, not a political one, not a partisan one, a constitutional one, issued by the men who have spent their lives defending it, and it demands to be taken seriously. Because the next chapter of this story has not been written yet, and who writes it depends entirely on whether anyone heard them.